I thought I was flying to Tuscany to claim a dusty old villa from my grandfather's will. Turns out, I was landing in the middle of a betrayal my own family had been planning for years. They say death changes everything. For me, it began with a phone call just after dawn, soft light creeping into my modest apartment in Vermont, the smell of burnt coffee still lingering in the air. "Sophia Bennett?" the voice on the other end said in a heavy Italian accent. "Your grandfather, Giuseppe Bellini, he has passed." I hadn't heard those words spoken aloud before. Giuseppe, Nonno to me, was the kind of man you thought would outlive the hills of Tuscany themselves. His voice had always sounded like the soil he tilled, deep, unyielding, rich with something ancient. As a schoolteacher with a stack of ungraded essays and a car that barely survived winter, I had no time for drama. But this wasn't just drama, it was blood, family, and a villa. Casa di Luz. The house where I'd spent every summer of my childhood running barefoot through the vineyards, chasing fireflies with jam-sticky hands while Nonno taught me to tell the difference between Montepulciano and Sangiovese just by smell. That old stone house with the blue shutters and creaky doors now belonged to me. Or so I thought. When I landed in Florence, the first thing that hit me wasn't the humidity or the scent of cypress in the air. It was the silence when I met my family. My mother, Elena, offered only a stiff hug. My brother, Luca, gave a handshake as though I were a business associate. My sister, Chiara, barely looked up from her phone. At the lawyer's office in Siena, I learned the truth. According to the reading of the will, Casa di Luz was mine. Sole ownership. Giuseppe had made it clear. But then came the documents. Neatly stapled. Slick with legalese. My signature. Except I had never signed anything. "The villa has already been sold," said a man in an expensive linen suit, smooth as the Chianti he probably drank with breakfast. "To an investor in Milan. Deal's closed." Almost. I felt like I'd been punched. My voice barely came out. "That's not my signature." My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. Luca cleared his throat. Chiara finally looked up. "It's complicated, Sophia." Complicated? Back at the villa, dusty and shuttered like it had been holding its breath, I wandered through the rooms I knew by heart. The sunroom where Nonno used to nap. The staircase where I'd once tripped and lost a tooth. And then the wine cellar. It was colder than I remembered. More still. A crack in the stone wall caught my eye. And behind it, an envelope. Sealed with wax and my grandfather's crest, a phoenix rising from a grapevine. Inside was a letter written in his steady hand. "Sophia, if you are reading this, it means you've returned and something is not right. There are people who would sell truth for convenience. But Casa di Luz is yours. Hidden in the basement, beneath the barrel marked 1978, are documents the lawyers never saw. Use them. Protect the land. And remember, light always returns." No. My hands trembled. Because suddenly I wasn't just a grieving granddaughter. I was a target. And I had work to do. The next morning I woke before dawn, haunted by the letter's final words, "Beneath the barrel marked 1978. In the soft blue light of the Tuscan sunrise, the house felt more alive, like it had been waiting. I crept down to the cellar, flashlight in hand, each step creaking under the weight of dust and time. The air was damp, soaked with the scent of old wood and buried truth. The barrels lined the room like forgotten soldiers, each marked with dates and chalky numbers. 1974. 1976. Then, finally, 1978. The barrel was wedged tight against the far wall. I pressed my palms to it, then braced my back and pushed. It groaned, resisting me like it too had secrets to keep. But then it gave way, revealing a trapdoor underneath, edges worn smooth from use. Inside was a small chest. Wooden. Locked but barely. A flathead screwdriver from Nonno's old tool bench popped it open. Inside, a bundle of yellowed papers tied with twine, several wax-sealed envelopes, and a leather-bound folder marked Proprietà e Varietà Riservata, private property and reserved varietals. My hands tingled as I flipped through them. Land records, notarized in 1997, naming me as sole beneficiary of Casa di Luz, with no transfer clauses and explicit instructions to void any sale without my written, witness consent. Then came the real treasure, certificates from Italy's Ministry of Agriculture, documenting rare grape varietals planted decades ago by Giuseppe under a pseudonym, to shield them from his business partners who had tried once to force him out. These vines, if proven authentic, were worth a fortune, not just in money but in legacy. I leaned back on my heels. This wasn't just about family betrayal or stolen property. It was about safeguarding a legacy my grandfather protected until his dying breath. And I needed help. Enter Francesca Rosso, an old friend of Nano's, now a lawyer in nearby Arezzo. She greeted me in a smart navy suit, her red hair pulled into a knot like she meant business and didn't have time for nonsense. Forgery and attempted fraudulent sale under Italian succession law? She said, scanning the documents. This is criminal. I exhaled, relief and dread fighting for space in my lungs. But my signature. We'll prove it's forged. And with these certificates we can freeze the sale immediately. Then her eyes narrowed on one name. Elena Bennett. Your mother. I nodded. Francesca's lips thinned. Well then, she said, picking up her phone. Let's wake the wolves. Francesca worked fast. Within 24 hours, she'd filed an injunction at the regional court in Arezzo, temporarily freezing all proceedings related to the villa's sale. We sent notarized copies of the ownership documents and rare grape certifications to the court, plus a formal claim of signature forgery. The buyer will back off once they see this, Francesca said as she tucked the papers into her briefcase. Unless they enjoy lawsuits. But the wolves? They didn't scatter, they circled. That afternoon, I received a message from my sister Chiara. Just one line. We need to talk. Alone. We met at a cafe in town, under a vine-covered pergola that somehow made betrayal feel more civilized. Chiara looked the same. Expensive sunglasses, flawless skin. A €1,000 handbag she definitely didn't buy with her interior design side hustle. But there was something in her posture. Hesitation. Regret. Sophia, she said, removing her glasses. I didn't know they were going to forge your name. I thought you agreed. I swear. I narrowed my eyes. And what exactly did you think I'd agreed to? She squirmed. That you'd let the villa go. That it was too much for you. You live in Vermont, you're a teacher. You don't even drink wine. I almost laughed. I grew up here every summer. I know every crack tile and every fig tree. Chiara stirred her espresso with unnecessary force. Mom said Nano left a mess. That the land was worthless. That we'd all be better off selling. I leaned in. Did Mom also say anything about the rare varietals? Or the ownership papers he hid? Chiara froze. Her spoon stilled. Wait, that's real. I found them in the wine cellar. Under the 1978 barrel. Her lips parted, eyes widening in slow horror. He told me not to touch that barrel once. When I was a kid, I thought it was just old wine. No, it was a warning. We sat in silence for a beat. Then softly Chiara said, I want to make it right. I studied her carefully. This wasn't a ploy. Her guilt sat too awkwardly in her frame. Then help me, I said. Tell me everything. Every meeting. Every document. Every lie. She nodded. Okay. Later that evening Francesca called. Good news. The investor pulled out. Bad news. Your family's lawyer just filed a motion contesting Giuseppe's mental capacity when he signed the will. My stomach dropped. They're saying Nano wasn't of sound mind? Exactly. And unless we prove otherwise, they could drag this out for months. I looked around the villa, the stone walls catching the golden light. This wasn't over. The wolves weren't just awake, they were hungry. That night the villa groaned. Old houses do that, creak and settle as they exhale memories, but this time it felt pointed. I wandered through the dark halls with a candle like a ghost retracing her own steps. In the study, the room Giuseppe never let anyone touch, I found a clue. A ledger. Not a legal document, not something notarized. Just an old-school leather-bound vineyard log filled with notes in his unmistakable script. Each page documented grape yields, seasonal weather, and tucked between pages, memos on his legal preparations. Underlined in red ink were phrases like, Francesca equals final will witness. Trust only her. Do not mention varietals to Elena or Giovanni. Giovanni, my uncle. Long deceased, but now it was clear he'd been in on whatever scheming happened decades ago. My family hadn't just tried to take the villa. They'd been circling it for years. In the margins, one entry stood out. April 4th, last update. Sophia will understand. April 4th. 1 week before he died. I closed the book slowly. He knew. Francesca arrived the next morning, coffee in hand, already mid-sentence. Their lawyer filed a motion to force a psychiatric evaluation retroactively. It's absurd. He was sharp until the end, I said. Even his wine pairings had footnotes. We need witnesses. People who can attest to that. Locals. She nodded. The farmhands. His physician. Anyone. So I drove out to see Marco, the oldest vineyard worker, who had started working for my grandfather in the 80s. He was pruning vines, his hands steady as ever, despite being nearly 70. Your grandfather? Mad? Never, he scoffed. That man remembered the pH of every barrel. He played chess with me weekly and beat me 9 times out of 10. Always drinking that same god-awful espresso. I smiled. Would you say that in court? Marco shrugged. For Giuseppe? I'd testify in song. By noon, we had a list of 7 witnesses. Francesca drafted affidavits faster than I could read them. But Chiara, she was the real key. That afternoon, we met again. This time, she brought a flash drive. It's all the email correspondence, she said, sliding it across the table. Between Mom, Luca, and the lawyer. Including the draft of the forged signature. They scan your passport to copy the curve of your initials. My breath caught. Why are you helping me now? Her voice dropped. Because I thought we were just bending the truth. Not betraying blood. She looked tired. Like this had worn her down more than she'd ever admit. You should tell Francesca everything, I said. Chiara hesitated. Will it mean jail? I didn't answer. Some truths come with consequences. As dusk fell, Francesca texted, we may have enough. But they're cornered now. Be careful. I looked up at Casa di Luz, glowing gold in the evening light. The walls weren't creaking anymore. They were waiting. We stepped into the courtroom like we were entering a battlefield because we were. It wasn't grand. Just a modest provincial courthouse in Arezzo with pale stone walls and high windows that spilled light across polished floors. But the silence in there? That held weight. Francesca walked beside me in a crisp black suit, her lips a tight line. My mother sat across the aisle, flanked by Luca and their lawyer, a smug man with salt and pepper hair and a posture that screamed entitlement. Elena wore her usual armor, an elegant beige coat, pearl earrings, and a blank expression like this was just another brunch she had to endure. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Maggiore, began the session. Motion to dispute the validity of the testament of Giuseppe Bellini, she said, adjusting her glasses. Brought forth by Elena Bennett and Luca Bennett contesting mental competency. Francesca stood. We submit counter-evidence. Sworn affidavits from 7 witnesses including Mr. Bellini's physician, attesting to his lucidity within the last year of his life. Additionally, we present a vineyard ledger in Mr. Bellini's hand with dated entries referencing recent events and legal strategies. Maggiore accepted the documents, flipping through pages with a practiced eye. Noted. And the claim regarding signature forgery? Francesca's eyes didn't leave the judges. We submit a forensic analysis comparing Ms. Bennett's authentic signature against the contested one conducted by an independent graphologist. The report deems the contested signature an artificial replication with inconsistencies in pressure and stroke. The opposing lawyer stood. Even if the signature was loosely inspired, the sale was conducted in good faith. I almost laughed out loud. Loosely inspired? Francesca echoed. Is that the new term for felony forgery? The judge raised a hand. Enough. Then she turned to my mother. Mrs. Bennett, would you like to speak? Elena rose slowly, folding her hands over her handbag like it might shield her. My father was not the same in the end. He grew paranoid. Distrustful. He stopped involving us in vineyard decisions. We feared he was being manipulated. By whom? Maggiore asked. Elena's gaze landed on me. By Sophia. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. Francesca didn't flinch. She had expected this. We also have the original email threads, Francesca said calmly, including discussions of how to expedite Sophia's approval using digital manipulation. Chiara sat behind me silent. Francesca glanced back, just briefly, and Chiara gave the smallest of nods. We call Chiara Bennett to testify, Francesca said. There was a pause. A shuffle. Then Chiara rose. She walked to the stand slowly like a weight pulled her down. And then, under oath, she burned the whole lie to ash. Chiara's heels clicked across the courtroom floor, each step louder than it should have been. She sat, took the oath, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, looked like someone ready to face a reckoning. Francesca began gently. Please state your name for the court. Chiara Bennett, she said, voice steady but quiet. And your relation to the plaintiff and respondent? I'm Sophia's sister. Elena's daughter. Francesca nodded. You've provided us with digital records, emails, and scanned documents. Can you explain what those are? Chiara glanced at our mother, then at Luca, whose jaw twitched. They're conversations between my family and our legal counsel. About selling Casa di Luz. About faking Sophia's signature to make it look like she agreed to the sale. The judge leaned forward slightly. You were aware this was happening? Francesca asked. I was at the time, yes, Chiara said, swallowing hard. I thought Sophia was being unreasonable. I believed Mom when she said it was just cleaning up a mess. Did you know the signature was forged? Chiara nodded. Yes. A hush fell over the courtroom like dust settling after an explosion. And what changed your mind? Chiara blinked fast. I found Nonno's letter. Not the one Sophia read, another one. It was hidden inside one of the old prayer books in the villa chapel. He wrote that family isn't about blood, it's about honor. About choosing truth even when it costs you something. Her voice cracked. Francesca paused, then asked, did your grandfather ever appear mentally unstable to you? Chiara shook her head. No. He was sharp as ever. He just didn't trust us anymore. And he was right not to. Silence. The opposing lawyer muttered something to Elena, whose face remained carved in stone. Luca stared at the floor. The judge turned to Francesca. Do you have anything further? Not at this time, Your Honor. Maggiore nodded. We'll recess for deliberation. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning for a ruling. Bang of the gavel. Just like that, it was over for now. As the courtroom emptied, Chiara approached me. I'm sorry, she said. I thought helping you now could never undo what we did. But maybe it's a start. I didn't say anything. Just hugged her. Not because it fixed everything, but because it mattered. Later that night, I stood in the vineyard beneath a sky pinpricked with stars. The air was sweet with ripening grapes and distant wood smoke. The villa lights glowed behind me like a memory refusing to fade. Francesca joined me, hands in her coat pockets. They'll probably avoid prison, she said. First-time offense, no physical harm, restitution likely. I nodded. What about the villa? She smiled faintly. Unless the judge loses her mind overnight? It's yours. We stood in silence for a moment. Giuseppe would be proud, she said. I looked out across the land. Rows of vines stretched like ribs from a sleeping giant. He never left, I said quietly. He just passed the torch. The next morning, the courtroom was cooler, quieter, like it too was holding its breath. I sat beside Francesca, hands clasped, every muscle in my body tense. Across from us, Elena looked smaller than usual. Less polished. Her pearl earrings were gone. Luca fidgeted, his usual cocky demeanor flattened into something closer to discomfort. Chiara sat behind me again. This time when I looked back, she gave me a faint, encouraging smile. Judge Maggiore entered and took her seat, a stack of papers in hand. This court has reviewed the evidence, she began, her voice sharp and direct. It is the conclusion of this bench that the last will and testament of Giuseppe Bellini is valid and enforceable. The documentation provided by the respondent, along with corroborating witness statements and expert analysis, confirmed that Mr. Bellini acted with full mental capacity and lawful intent. My heart thudded. In addition, this court acknowledges the attempted sale of the estate as fraudulent, based on a forged signature. Though we defer criminal prosecution to the appropriate authorities, we issue a formal warning and record of misconduct to the plaintiffs. She looked over her glasses at Elena. Inheritance rights transfer in full to Sophia Bennett, effective immediately. Case closed. Bang of the gavel. The air left my lungs in a single, ragged breath. Francesca turned to me, a rare smile breaking across her face. It's yours. I nodded slowly, stunned. It's mine. Chiara approached Elena and Luca, who had already risen from their bench. I caught a snatch of their conversation, Elena hissing, "You destroyed everything," and Chiara replying, "No. I finally told the truth." They left without another word to me. Outside, the sun was warm and blinding, and for a moment I just stood there, letting it sink in. Casa di Luz was mine, not just by blood, but by fight. 2 days later I returned to the villa, official documents in hand. I walked through each room again, study, sunroom, cellar, this time with the weight of doubt lifted. Giuseppe's portrait still hung above the fireplace, his stern gaze somehow softer now. The next weeks were a blur. Francesca connected me with vineyard consultants. Marco agreed to stay on and help manage the land. A local enologist visited and confirmed what we hoped. The rare varietals were viable. With proper care, he said, you're sitting on something truly special. We filed for certification. I began designing a rebrand. Casa di Luz would not be sold. It would be reborn. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I made my choice. I wasn't going back to Vermont. My classroom would have to find another teacher. Because this land, this legacy, these vines was where I belonged. I used to think legacy was something heavy. A burden. A chain of expectations that kept you tethered to someone else's past. But now, every time I walked through the vineyard, watching the leaves catch gold in the late afternoon light, I realized Giuseppe hadn't left me a burden. He'd left me a compass. The old villa came alive again in stages. We replaced the broken shutters, patched the roof tiles, and sanded down the front doors until the original grain reappeared, olive wood, smooth and sun-warmed. I moved into the upstairs bedroom, the one with the view of the west field and the cypress trees standing like sentinels. Francesca called it my Queen's Tower. Marco became my right hand. He taught me how to prune with precision, how to smell rot before it took root, and how to talk to the vines like they were children, gently, with firm hands. They respond to honesty, he said one morning as we knelt side by side in the soil. So did I, apparently. Chiara started showing up more often. Not just an apology, but an effort. She offered to redesign the guest rooms for agritourism, even volunteered to coordinate branding for the wine labels. You know this isn't a boutique hotel, right? I teased her once as she presented sketches for the tasting room. I know, she said with a shrug. But maybe it can be something beautiful. Honest. Like Giuseppe would have wanted. We kept the name, Casa di Luce, House of Light. Because that's what it had always been. A place where the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually came to the surface. Francesca dropped by once a week with updates on the legal wrap-up. Elena and Luca had gone quiet. The Milan investor had moved on and the town, once wary, had begun to warm again. One morning as we walked the rows checking the younger vines, Francesca said, "You're becoming one of them." Who? The land people. You've got dirt under your nails and plans in your eyes. I laughed. I used to teach Shakespeare and hand out detention slips. Now you coax grapes out of stubborn soil. She handed me a letter that had arrived at her office. Official seal. Government stationery. I opened it with cautious fingers and skimmed. Then stopped. They approved the certification, I said. The rare varietals, they're official. Protected under DCG. Francesca let out a breath. Giuseppe would have cried. I did cry. Not big, dramatic tears. Just quiet ones. The kind you let fall when something old is finally made right. That evening I stood on the veranda with a glass of the last bottle my grandfather ever corked. A dusty 2004 Sangiovese blend. As the sky shifted from gold to lavender, I toasted to the man who planted more than vines. He planted a future. And I was finally ready to harvest it. Harvest day arrived like a promise fulfilled. The hills of Tuscany rolled gold and green under a pale sunrise. In the distance, church bells rang, less like a call to worship, more like a benediction. For the first time in decades, Casa di Luce's vines would be harvested under the name Giuseppe intended. Under my name. Workers moved through the rows with practiced grace. Shears snipped, baskets filled. Chiara coordinated the volunteers from the village, college kids and retirees alike, eager to be part of something that felt like a resurrection. I wore my grandfather's old field hat. It was too big and smelled like must and leather in time. But it felt right. Your technique is improving, Marco said, eyeing my cuts. You don't butcher the vines anymore. High praise, I smirked. By noon, the crush began. The old press, restored lovingly over the summer, creaked to life with a low groan like a waking beast. Grape must flowed, rich and purple, the scent so dense it curled in the nose like incense. We celebrated that night. Not with pomp but with people. A long table stretched beneath the olive trees, strung with lights and covered in mismatched plates. Francesca brought wine. Marco brought bread. The neighbors brought everything else. Even the priest from the village came, offering a quiet blessing before tucking into a bowl of wild boar ragu. Chiara tapped her glass and raised a toast. To new beginnings that honor old ones. I stood too, suddenly aware of the hush that followed. The kind of hush that asks you to speak from the bone. My grandfather once told me that vines are like people, I said. They need strong roots, yes, but also space to grow. I didn't understand what he meant until this year. Until the lies and the fight, and the truth that followed. I looked around at the faces lit by candlelight. Casa di Luce isn't just a vineyard. It's a home. And home isn't where you start. It's where you return. Even if you have to fight your way back. Glasses clinked. Someone called out, "Alla Luce," and laughter rippled down the table like wind in tall grass. Later, after the fire pit died down and people began to drift home, Francesca stayed behind. We watched the stars come out one by one. You've changed, she said. Maybe I just stopped pretending, I replied. She nodded slowly. And what now? I glanced toward the hills, now cloaked in silver moonlight. The land was quiet, but alive. Now, I said, we make wine. We grow. We stay. 1 year later, I stood in the same cellar where I'd found Giuseppe's letter, only now it smelled like fermentation and fresh oak barrels instead of secrets. The first official vintage of Casa di Luz was aging in rows of polished tanks and lovingly restored casks. The rare varietals, those long-hidden treasures, had produced a yield smaller than expected but astonishing in quality. The enologist used words like singular and heritage-defining. I just called it honest. We bottled the first run last month. Each label bore the original family crest, a phoenix rising from a vine, drawn from my grandfather's old wine journal. Underneath it, a single phrase in his handwriting, La Verita crest, the truth grows. It does. The vineyard had become more than a place. It was a rhythm now woven into my days. Pruning in the mornings. Walking the rows with Marco in the afternoon. Answering emails from boutique importers in the evenings, my laptop balanced beside a glass of whatever we were sampling. Chiara stayed. She'd renovated the guest house and started hosting weekend tastings for tourists. She had a knack for storytelling, spinning Giuseppe's legacy into something vivid and real for strangers looking for magic in Tuscany. And somehow it was magic. Not because we were perfect, God knows we weren't. But because we had fought for something that mattered and made space for truth in the rubble. Even my mother eventually reached out. A short letter, handwritten. I don't ask forgiveness. Only that you remember I once tried my best. Even when it failed. I didn't write back. But I kept the letter. Maybe that's forgiveness in its earliest form. Francesca came by every few weeks. Not for legal business anymore, just to sit under the fig tree with a glass of wine and argue about politics or books or which vintage would pair best with chestnut stew. You should enter the regional fair this year, she said one afternoon. Too soon, I replied. Too modest, she corrected. The land is ready. So are you. That night, I wandered the vineyard with a flashlight and a sweater draped over my shoulders. The vines rustled in the breeze. The soil was firm beneath my feet. Above me, stars shimmered like candlelight spilled across black velvet. I remembered standing here, broken and unsure, holding a letter from the past and wondering what came next. Now I knew. Casa di Luz would go on. Not because of inheritance or bloodlines, but because truth had been planted here. Watered with courage. Lit with resolve. And here's what I learned. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you protect, what you grow, what you choose to stay for, even when you have every reason to leave. La Verita cress. And in the house of light it thrives.